thanks for joining us. We are going to be drawing still lives today, which is super fun because it means you can take these skills, be at home, and draw all of the beautiful objects that you have and be inspired. So you should have seen the image that we shared on our post on Artrageous, and we're going to be using it to follow along today. But it was based on a still life that I set up right behind us here. And it's particularly Artrageous with some paint splattered boots from the show and a very fun costume hat, some paintbrushes, and of course paint, my favorite. So we're going to be looking at how do we take this photo and create a drawing that looks like it. And we're going to be covering lots of drawing tips, some basic composition tools, and things like that as we go. So just because I have a big page, I've outlined what your page might be. So just assume this box is your whole page. So some basic tips about setting up a still life is, one, typically there's some sort of backdrop, and that could be a wall, it could be a piece of fabric that you've draped. You could grab pillowcases, scarves, long dresses, whatever you have that's fabric, and it's going to create a nice drapery backdrop to give you that more traditional still life setup. If you have shadow boxes or a black box where you can control the lighting, that is used by a lot of professional artists to create still lives, but not necessary. So you've got a piece of fabric, you want to grab whatever objects you want, and then we're going to place them and pick a still life. So that's what I worked on this morning and came up with this. So some basic rules about setting, not rules, but guidelines about setting up a still life is, one of them is the rule of thirds. So what that means is, say here's your page. To set up a composition that is attractive to the eye naturally, you want to divide your page into thirds. Do I need to draw that bigger? So what it means is dividing it horizontally and vertically. And to kind of place your objects in a way that looks good, a really nice simple composition. A really nice simple composition to start with is what's called an L-shaped composition. And what that means is, on your page, you have a focal point. So every composition has a focal point, and that might be the tallest object. And it's going to be placed on the first vertical. And then everything else in the composition is going to come out like an L from that. Now this is an oversimplification of this in practice. You can also do it the opposite way, where the vertical focal point is on the right vertical line, and all the other objects are coming to the left. So this is a really simple way to set up a good composition. What it would look like if you have the grid is, you have an object here, and this is the focal point, and you have an object or multiple objects here. And in that, just some other tips, is that subconsciously our eye actually favors objects on the right. And the reason for that is because we are programmed to read from left to right. If we read from right to left, the left side would be dominant. So because it's dominant, it is really nice to have your main object on the right. It's not necessary, but just an added tip. And with that, you want to think about lighting when you're setting up a composition as well. So I'll talk about that as we go into our drawing. But I just wanted to introduce the L shape, the rule of thirds, and then the other thing to know is that there's the rule of odds in composition, whether you're painting, drawing, printing, whatever it is. And what that means is it's more interesting for the viewer to look at an image with an odd number of objects in it rather than an even number. So 3, 5, 7, 9. And what we've done here is we have 2 boots paint jar, paint brush tool, hat, and 3 paintbrushes. And while this does add up to 8, this object right here, which is like the steampunk goggle feature on the hat, is distinct enough to your eye that it kind of acts like a 9th object in this composition. So how you want to start, you've got it all placed the way you want it. The way we're going to start this is kind of by blocking out the major shapes. So it's really simple. First, we're going to outline this drapery of fabric to kind of tell us how much of the page we're working within. So it comes over not quite to halfway, and it comes down about halfway. So we're just going to draw that in. Okay. Now the major shapes are the boots and the hat and these paint objects down here. The focal point in this composition is really this area right here with the paint jar. And the reason for that is that this area is the brightest and has the most amount of contrast against this black hat and the dark blue boots, but also because the steampunk goggles up here become the tallest shape in these objects. And so that sets up your vertical here, and everything else is coming to the left of it. So I'm gonna just start with the edge of the boots over here and mark that on the page. And I'm gonna look at the bottom of the shape of the boot, which swoops down a little bit and then flattens out. And then I'm going to mark sort of the next boot. Again, it swoops down in the same way and has a shorter little curve area there. And I'm not going to keep this very detailed, and I apologize, I have to draw fairly light because you just want to make sure you've got the shapes in the right place before you start working dark, so hopefully you can see it on the live video. And then drawing in this square for the paint brush tool as kind of an anchor point of where we want to go. And it's very hard to draw sideways and see where I'm at. Okay, there we go. And then we're going to make that just a little bit smaller, not super happy with, whoops, where I placed that. There we go. And then the hat is the next major shape. So it scoops on the right and comes up at a bit of an angle in. And then the top hat portion comes up, scoops, and then again, we're looking at the angle of the hat there. And so how you want to check that this is the right length is you can measure things in relationship to each other. So another thing about setting up a still life is where the objects are placed suggests relationships to them. So this is one kind of group that tells you subconsciously that all of these things are related somehow. If you had 2 very distant objects on the composition, it would tell you that maybe they're not related, or you can create tension by doing this, or juxtaposition, all kinds of fun things. So I want to see the relationship and measure these. So I'm just lining at the edge of my pencil to the back of this boot, and you can do this by holding your pencil up to the screen, and then just marking with my thumb here how long this whole boot is, and that's going to give me a measurement. And then I'm going to keep my thumb there, hold it up to this portion of the hat, and see how much longer is the hat in comparison with the boot. Okay, so I've got, and then coming back to my drawing, and I'm saying, okay, if I made this boot this long, would the hat be longer if I was to go here? And yes, in fact it would be, so I like that. So I'm gonna just kind of put some dashes there, and then I'm going to draw the big curve of the hat here. And up and around we go. Okay, and then I'm gonna come back to the steampunk feature, but I'm just going to loosely draw kind of the outline here. Now, you might have noticed I put a black and white photo on here and a color photo. It's great to work from color, but to take away one of the steps of your brain kind of transitioning from color to black and white is to, of course, just change the photo to black and white after you've taken it. And the other thing that's nice about this is it shows you where the darks and the lights are really quickly. So it's another tool to help you draw. Okay, so after this scoops around, the top of this boot kind of cuts into the hat a little bit. Comes down, goes over. Now we notice that the edge of this boot doesn't quite touch the edge of the fabric, so we want to leave some space here. For those of you that watched last week, this would be the negative space. So we're paying attention to that. And then we're going to come down and angle the boot. And you know what? I came over a bit too far, so I'm going to bring that back. And stop it there. And you know what? I want to make this boot a little bit longer now that I've come all the way around. There we go. Okay, so this is the basic shape within the composition. And then we've got the paint brushes, which will come back in. I'm gonna erase some of this line here. There we go. And I'll erase that, clean that shape up a bit. Okay, so now that we've got the basic shape and you're happy with it, we're going to come back in and gradually add more and more detail, more and more shading, and it's going to start to take form. So the easy shape to start with is going to be this focal point of the paint jar over here. So it comes up from within the square of the paint tool, so we're going to overlap that a little bit. And then the lid is curved on the bottom because it is a cylinder, so curve that slightly. The edge of it is slightly out from the edge of the jar, and then the oval will be, and the curve will be mirrored in this oval on the top of the cylinder. And then we're going to come straight down on the other side, and there you go. Okay, so now this is going to set up a lot of the relationship for this boot that comes next. And we're going to start with this line that divides the hat and the boot, and come up like that, and then come down for the angle here, kind of differentiate this boot from the other one, and there we go. And now you can kind of see the edge of the sort of further away side, so I'm just going to mark that in. And that's kind of what all of these laces are tying to. And then we have some very fun shoelaces that we'll get to in a moment. And then the back of this boot comes down kind of like that. Okay, now we've got the big sole of the shoe that protrudes from the edge here, so it comes out a bit further, comes out a bit further over here. So we'll just draw that in. Okay, now we have some very fun shoelaces. I'm just going to draw the eyelets that the shoelaces are coming out of. And then we are going to add some shoelaces. And these are nice black thick shoelaces, so we can just shade those in quite dark from the top. Okay, so now that one's coming in. And if you can't see it perfectly on the image, it doesn't really matter where the shoelaces are going, just that they are in fact there. And then that one has no shoelace, so I'm just gonna color it in. And then over here, we're gonna do the same thing. Draw the circles for the eyelets that you can kind of see. And one more. And now have some fun shading in some shoelaces. So now this one's fun because you can see the shoelaces coming out down here and looping around this side of the shoe that is slightly disappearing. Okay. And I've got a big loop over here. And another big loop this way. And shading that in. Okay. So next we can add these paintbrushes. So one of them is coming out, and you can just check the angle by taking your pencil and lining it up with the angle of the paintbrush and kind of mirroring that angle on your page just to give your brain an idea of where you want to go as you're drawing. Okay, that's good enough. And then this one comes out from the drapery a bit as well, so I'm going to have that stick up here. And then the third one is entirely within the fabric. And draw that. There. Go. And this one curves up a little bit. Okay. Excellent. Now, we want to add some of the darks, and that's going to help give us a better sense of this composition. So we have a lot of black in this hat and where the boot is receding into the hat, and then of course the top. So if you have a darker pencil at home, if you have a full pencil set with all the ranges, I'm using a 5B. You can use a 4, 5, 6, 8B pencil. Anything that's going to give you these really nice darks really easily. Now, if you don't have a drawing set at home and you're just using a standard pencil, it's usually closest to an HB pencil, and it just means you're going to have to push a little bit harder to get those darks, and they won't get quite as dark as what you're seeing me do here. But that's okay. And this is in some shadow too. And you notice I'm outlining what we're going to come back to in the steampunk feature and adding those darks. And then in here, I'm just going to use the side of my pencil to go a bit quicker and shading all this in, and you can come back and clean up the edges after. Outline these shapes again. There we go. Okay, and now the boots. So the boots, where it's further away, so in this portion of the boot and this portion of the boot is further away from the light source. And the light source in this image is coming from this direction. So it is above and to the left of the image. And what that does is it causes a cast shadow on the opposite side. So we're going to add that shadow that you can see in the picture from the hat. And that's going to tell you that your object has depth and is in fact in real space, not just floating. And then we're gonna add the shadow that's underneath this boot and paint tool, and we're gonna decide where this fabric creates a horizontal line as well on both sides. And that's gonna help ground the image, and some more shadow under here. Okay, so already it's looking a little bit more three-dimensional, but we're gonna come back in here and shade this side of the boot that is further away from the light. And it extends under here too. Now when you're setting up a composition at home, light plays a really big role in creating the composition, the feel. It's going to change the image a lot based on how you change the lighting. So ideally, you would have some sort of control over the light source. And a lot of people use window lighting, but it just kind of shortens the time window because of course the lighting is changing if you're working by window light. Or if you have one light source, it's going to create a more dramatic look, and it's going to give you stronger, what's called cast shadows, and give you more of that Caravaggio look for those art history fans. Whereas if you have two sources of light, it's going to soften the look of your image. So what we're working with from this reference point has one strong light source coming from this side, but there's also the overhead lighting, so it's not a true single pointed light source. The other thing that's fun that you can experiment with is, say you have a really strong light. For those just working from home, you might have a lamp and you take the lampshade off, for instance, or you just have a small lampshade and you can really focus the where the light's going. You can put either a white scarf over it, or even just put a white plastic bag over the whole light, and it's going to soften the light and give you that more subdued, subtle lighting. And you can play around with that and see what you like best. Okay, so now we're adding the shading in this side of the boot and coming under here. So we see on both boots around here is quite a bit darker than the top of the boot. So I'm just adding that shadow. Okay, and shade that in. Now we've lost some of our shoelaces, but that's okay. We can just go back in and darken some of them. Okay, now you can smooth this out in many ways, and you can do it with your fingers, but I suggest washing your hands first, because, you know, washing your hands is everybody's favorite thing to do these days, but also because it's going to get the oil off of your fingers and it's going to help you control the shading a little bit better. Or you can use paper tortillon if you've got these tools at home, and it just shades that in and smooths it out. But for those of you that don't have one, I don't want you to feel left out. Your finger will work just fine. I'm going to add some more shadow here, add some more shadow back here. And this is quite dark, almost black entirely, except for right here. So I'm going to push that dark and create some depth and space in here. And darken this up even more. Now, whenever I'm working, whether it's in color or in paint or in pencil, you kind of go around and around the image, never pushing one detail to finishing point without doing, you know, some of the shading. So for instance, some of the shading elsewhere. So I didn't, you know, make this area as dark as I could have before shading in all of these areas. And I just go around and around the image and add more darks as I need to. Because every time you come around with your eye, you're going to see something different and you're going to say, oh, I missed that the first time around, or I want to make that darker. Keeping in mind the relationship of light and dark in your picture, because that's what's really moving the viewer's eye around and also you know, creating that composition. Everything is light, and that's super fun. So because everything is in a relationship with light and dark, now I've established, okay, this is kind of like my darkest dark in here, and down here it's kind of like your black point. So I wouldn't want, for instance, the tip of this boot to be as dark as that, because this is more of my middle value in here. And that was a lot of terms, or you can just draw what you see and not worry about the terms. So we've got some really fun details of stitching on the boots over here, so I'm going to add that in. And then Now that I've got the darks in here, I see, okay, there's some darks in the drapery here, and of course this whole corner. So you can come in here. For the drapery, I would suggest using the side of your pencil to create those folds, because it's not very often that drapery has such hard lines in it that you need the tip of your pencil, but you want to kind of have it appear that the fabric is folding back. So put some shading in, and then in the middle of that shading, still using the side of your pencil, making a little bit darker. So if I were to do that bigger, just to demonstrate, if this was a fold going into here, this is going to be the darkest in the middle, and it's going to get gradually lighter, and then it's going to fold back on the other side. So that tells you the fabric is going wee, and then you can just push the darks as much as you need to. So again, using only the side of the pencil. And I'm going to add some more folds in here, and then I'm going to outline this with, again, the side of my pencil to tell me what is the background, which in the setup I created, it is a flat black background. So it's just going to be fully shaded in. And I won't do all of it now because it would take me quite some time, but just to give you an idea, and then you can, you know, fully shade that in as you develop the picture. I'm just going to do it really quick here, just to show you that this black shape is going to help balance out all of the darks over here. And when you're setting up a still life, you want to think about how your eye moves around the picture. So I really loved these loops that are on the hat because they create some really nice movement. And they come up here and up here, and they're full of fun details that, you know, for those of you that want to take this drawing further, I added this hat hoping that it would, you know, give you a bit of a challenge, something you don't get to see every day. And for those who want to simplify, you can just, you know, draw a single line and kind of this shape, but it's totally up to you how much you want to develop it. And then there's the fun kind of coiled tube here, okay? And then the drapery, which is why I suggest drapery, is going to help add movement to the picture. So if you have the focal point on the right side of your L-shaped composition like we do, it's really nice to have this drapery come back in this angle. I would flip it if my L composition focal point was up on the left-hand side, so I might add the drapery over here. Because what this does is your eye naturally reading from left to right is going to enter the page here, kind of follow this short line of the boot, and then come up here. But in order to, you know, keep your eye interested on the page, you want something that's going to bring it back around, and you're going to start all over again. And there's a lot of compositional YouTube videos, you know, on the golden mean, and I won't get into all of that. But basically, your eye enters the page, it's going to come up at this vertical part, and because our vertical part is already curved up and to the left, it's going to send your eye up and to the left. And also with the paintbrushes, it's going to have a reason for your eye to go back that way. And then it's going to enter again with the fabric. And what that means is, as a viewer, it's going to be more engaging because you're going to look at it and your eye is going to naturally and subconsciously just want to stay in the picture. Whereas if you have a picture that is one object and it's smack in the middle, you know, there it is. There goes my pencils. It's not as engaging. It's a bit more static. It doesn't have your eye move around the page. The other thing, just as a tip, as you're building compositions at home, is you don't want to draw objects that are touching, or you don't want to line up the objects that are touching the page. So, what's an example? Okay, the paint jar. If the paint jar was touching the page, you know, it sets up a very different feel and is kind of a faux pas in traditional art guides to do that. Either you want to cut off the image from the composition or have it completely within the frame. So either, you know, cut off that paint jar on the bottom or have it within the page like we do here. Some other fun tips. I mean, it's nice to, you know, kind of break the space up. So that's why I have a paintbrush coming out from the drapery, because it sends your eye back into this negative space to loop around, rather than having all of the paintbrushes within the drapery. Just adds a little bit more variety. So I'm probably very close to running out of time for this lesson. So I'm going to stop the drawing there. The other things I just want to share with you about composition is that you can look at texture, varying sizes of objects, color, but really focusing again on lights and darks, and using this rule of thirds is just a really nice simple entry point to how to set up a successful composition and then have fun exploring drawing. And I drew an example of this, so after developing this further, I kind of took it to here. So I made the darks quite dark in here, looked at that drapery and it's quite dark as well. Got some cast shadows. I even drew in this shadow, which helps break up the foreground of this image quite nicely. And then there's some really fun radiating wrinkles and folds in the fabric that are quite light, but still add quite a nice dimension if you have time to add those in as well. So I hope this has been useful and fun and inspired you to create some compositions from your everyday home objects. Our everyday home objects just happen to include costuming from fun shows covered in paint. So that's extra fun for us. So thank you and look forward to seeing what you create.